Now let's look at the immediate impact of the Qur'an. A new monotheism had been declared. Little did the Byzantine Christians in the north of Arabia, also preaching monotheism, realize what was coming. Nor did the Persians in the northeast of Arabia. Meanwhile, Muhammad became known as the Prophet Muhammad, leader of a new monotheistic movement in the little town of Mecca in Arabia. His followers believed, as indeed they still do, that the Qur'an had come directly from God to humanity through the human agency of Muhammad. The crucial element, the divine element in the story, was the Qur'an itself. Now let's look at the spreading of the message of the Qur'an. Let's fast forward to 632, the year of the Prophet's death. Let's also look at this map. On this map, the dark brown part actually indicates expansion of Islam under the Prophet Muhammad from 622 to 632, the last 10 years of his life. So by the time of his death, this was the expansion of Islam, or at least impact of Islam. The light brown part shows the expansion immediately after the death of the Prophet. In fact, in the last, in the 30 years after the death of the Prophet, from 632 to 661. The cream part shows the expansion during the next period, that is the Umayyad Caliphate, from 661 to 750. As you can see from this map, within a short period of the Prophet's death, Muslim Arab armies moved into areas of north and western parts of Arabia, in today's Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, and so forth. They also moved to modern-day Iraq and Egypt. There were two major empires to the north of Arabia then. Now let's look at this map also. One is the Christian Byzantine Empire to the northwest of Arabia, and the other is the Persian Sassanid Empire to the northeast of Arabia. These were the two superpowers at the time. The Persian Empire was completely defeated by the Arab Muslims soon after the death of the Prophet, and the Byzantine Empire was largely defeated also, but it remained for some time. Now, some of the key dates relating to the major events are provided in the set text, so I won't go into that. By the end of the 7th century of the Common Era, that is the 1st century of Islam, less than 100 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Muslims were ruling a vast empire, or caliphate as Muslims usually refer to it, stretching from North Africa to Central Asia to borders of China and India. This is just the political and military impact. It was going to have major consequences on the intellectual, economic, social, cultural, and religious fronts of the world. We will not be covering these in this lecture, but this is not about converting the regions under Muslims' rule to Islam. Religions practiced before in these regions were allowed to continue. Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and other religious traditions. In fact, Muslim Arabs were ruling over a very large non-Muslim majority. Bruce Lawrence sums up the geopolitical impact of early Islam in his very interesting book, The Qur'an, a Biography, published in 2006, which I recommend you to look at. Bruce Lawrence writes, "It was a military conquest that occurred faster and with more consequence than the spread of the Roman Empire 700 years earlier. It made Arab armies and navies the major controlling force of both the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. It also expanded the audience for the Qur'an beyond what could have been imagined in the lifetime of the Prophet. Our understanding of early Muslim history owes much to the accounts of the spread of the new religion. Particularly interesting are the records of the different responses of conquered peoples to the triumphant march of the Muslim Arabs across numerous cultural, religious, and civilizational boundaries. As part of the advance of Islam, most of the conquered peoples underwent a process of what we might call enculturation or Arabization. Some cultures, however, resisted. Persia is a case in point. So let's look at very briefly on the Arabization and the case of Persians. Unlike most other cultures penetrated by Islam in this period, the Persians, now known as Iranians, were never Arabized in cultural terms fully. The spread of Islam as a social movement had harnessed Sasanian Persia's imperial ambitions to the new religion, Islam. The Persian Empire was effectively incorporated into the Arab political ascendancy. Yet, at the same time, their Arab conquerors allowed them considerable cultural autonomy. Persian language and cultural tradition, although influenced by Arabs and Arabism, they were never fully assimilated. Consequently, Iranian socio-cultural identity remained quite distinctive from Arab identity and remains so to this day. For now, it's simply worth noting that the Persians, whose rich and complex civilization long preceded the rise of Islam in Arabia, and who felt themselves to be culturally distinct from their Arab conquerors, nonetheless became committed to monotheism and the Qur'an. That is, they abandoned their old religion of Zoroastrianism and embraced Islam. That this occurred is clear indicator of the profound impact of the Qur'an on neighboring societies. Societies with a strong cultural identity, and were often contemptuous of the desert Arabs and their seemingly simple ways. As a religious movement, then, Islam proved remarkably successful from the start. Its rapid development from a religious movement into a political system, which is called the Islamic Caliphate, and into a world religion is unique in the annals of religious history. The socio-political nature of its impact from the beginning is particularly interesting. Patricia Krohn, a historian, comments, Islam came upon the world as a totally unexpected development. The Middle East, into which Islam was born, was divided between the two superpowers, the Sasanian, that is Iranian, and the Byzantine Greco-Roman empires, which held sway from Central Asia to southern Spain. Arabs were most unlikely carriers of a new world religion. By the 7th century, they had been in Arabia for some 1600 years without staging a major conquest, so it was a reasonable assumption that they never would. Nonetheless, in the 630s, there suddenly began a coordinated invasion of the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, severely mangling the former and wholly destroying the latter, claiming that God had revealed the truth to them. Their new faith not only survived, but also spread rapidly, engendered new institutions, modes of thought, and lifestyles, in short, a new civilization. By the time the dust had settled, about 800 CE, the Middle East had been transformed beyond recognition. From the perspective of the carriers of this new religion, these desert Arabs, stateless and socially fragmented as they were, found in the Qur'an a new social impetus. As a people prone to the conflict and the competitiveness that underlies tribal societies, they now aspired to a more positive vision, one of social cohesion, development, and political influence. Their response to the Quran was to prove profound and permanent. This was first expressed as a desire to carry its revelation of the Quran beyond Mecca and Medina to the wider world. Such then was the historical consequence of Muhammad's vision in the cave, and many visions that followed. To understand how the event of the Quran ushered in a new religious era, we must now retrace our steps somewhat. We need to trace the historical process whereby the Quran became the religious and political blueprint for a distinctly Muslim monotheism. How it was able to offer a more humane vision of human life than that which had prevailed in Mecca, a vision able to inspire an entire civilization. Now let's look at the unpacking of the socio-historical context of the Prophet and the Quran. Let's look at the first steps. To understand just how this happened, how the advent of the Quran ushered in so remarkable a religious era, we need to pause a little. We need to slowly unpack the socio-historical context in which both the Prophet and the Quran itself emerged. This means tracing the social process whereby the Quran was seen as a religious and political basis, a blueprint for a distinctly Muslim monotheism. We need to understand why a Muslim monotheism was able to galvanize the desert Arabs in a way that earlier Jewish and Christian monotheism had not. We need to see how the Quran provided a truly humane vision of human life by replacing norms that had prevailed in Mecca before the revelation. In other words, by exploring the profoundly functional nature of the Quranic ethos for warring tribes with a worldview dominated by harsh social realities and an implacable environment.